They fired me for stealing. I cried, please, I didn't do this. But my boss laughed and said, you're not just fired, you're finished. 2 years later, I bought the company. He walked into my office. I had always thought of myself as a man who kept his head down. I worked hard. I showed up early, stayed late, did what was asked of me without complaint. I had built a life for myself from the ground up. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. And for the most part, I was proud of the life I had. But it all unraveled in an instant. The day they accused me of stealing was the day everything changed. It started like any other Tuesday. The warehouse was bustling as usual, the low hum of machines in the background, forklifts zooming by, the air thick with the smell of grease and metal. I had a routine: unload the deliveries, check the inventory, make sure everything was in order. Nothing extraordinary. But as the hours passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Greg, my boss, kept calling me into his office for these quick, curt conversations. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, we'd worked together for years, and Greg was the kind of guy who liked to keep things moving fast. But now, as I replay the day in my head, I see the pattern I missed, how the conversation seemed to shift each time. I didn't know it then, but he was setting me up. It wasn't until the end of my shift that the hammer came down. Michael, I need to see you in my office, Greg called out from the entrance of the warehouse. His voice was strangely tight, his face looking more pinched than usual. I felt a small twinge of unease in the pit of my stomach, but I followed him. When I walked into his office, the first thing I noticed was the paper on his desk, the bold letters across the top. Termination notice. A chill ran through me, but I told myself it was just a formality. Have a seat, Greg said, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. I sat down, crossing my arms over my chest, trying to mask my confusion. What's this about, Greg? Everything's fine. I did my job like always. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he shuffled the papers on his desk, like he was searching for something. Then he looked up at me, his eyes cool, detached. I'm afraid the company has no choice but to let you go, Michael. His words were clipped, unemotional. I blinked, stunned. What? Why? Greg's fingers tapped on the edge of his desk as he spoke. We've come to a troubling conclusion. It seems that equipment from the warehouse has gone missing. High-end items worth a lot of money, and the investigation has pointed directly to you. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's not possible, I said, my voice shaky. I haven't stolen anything. I don't even know what you're talking about. Greg's eyes narrowed, just a little. I'm afraid the evidence is clear, Michael. You're the only one with access to the equipment, and it was you who signed for the last shipment. I shook my head. I signed for it, yes, but I didn't take anything. You have to believe me. But Greg wasn't looking at me the way a friend looks at you when you're in trouble. No, he wasn't looking at me with concern. He was looking at me like I was already guilty, like he had already decided my fate. You should have thought about that before taking the equipment, he said, leaning back in his chair. The company cannot tolerate theft. I'm afraid we'll have to let you go immediately. I stood up, the anger surging through me, but I tried to keep my voice steady. This is bullshit, Greg. You know me. You know I would never do something like this. But he didn't respond. Instead, he slid the termination papers across the desk. It's done, Michael. It's over. The rest of the day was a blur. I went home, not knowing what to do with myself. I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. It felt like a bad dream, something that couldn't be real. But as I sat in my apartment, staring at the termination letter in my hands, I realized something. I had lost everything. I'd worked at that warehouse for 5 years. I had built my reputation there, forged relationships, and in a single moment, it was all gone. I tried calling a few of my colleagues, the ones I'd worked with the longest, but no one picked up. I sent messages. Nothing. They were all gone. I couldn't help but wonder if Greg had already spun his story to them, telling them what I had done, if I was already the villain in their eyes. And then there was Linda. Linda, my wife, the woman I had spent the last 7 years with. I went home to her, but she didn't greet me with her usual smile. She didn't ask about my day. Instead, she looked at me like I was a stranger. What happened? She asked, her voice flat. I was fired, I said. They accused me of stealing. She blinked, taking a step back. What? How? I don't know. They just said I took something, but I didn't. My voice cracked a little. I swear I didn't do it. Linda stood there for a moment, her face unreadable. Then, almost as if she had already made up her mind, she turned away. I don't know what to say, Michael. If it's true, how could you do something like that? It's not true, I shouted, the words pouring out before I could stop them. I didn't do it. She shook her head, her eyes cold. I can't be with someone who might have done something like that. I need to think. And just like that, she was gone. Not physically, but emotionally. The woman I thought I knew, my wife, my partner, my best friend, had walked away from me in an instant. I had lost my job. I had lost my colleagues. And now I had lost the only person I thought I could count on. I spent the next few days in a daze. I tried to reach out to Greg, tried to explain, but he wouldn't take my calls. I went to the police, but they told me there was nothing they could do without solid evidence. Every door I tried to open seemed to close in my face. It was like I was drowning and no one could see me sinking. And so I was left with nothing. A man without a job, without friends, without the woman I loved. I had no choice but to start over from the bottom. But what they didn't know, what Greg didn't know, was that I wasn't finished. I wasn't done. And somehow, some way, I would make sure they paid for what they had done to me. 2 years. That's how long it took for me to crawl back from the hole they had thrown me into. 2 years of working jobs that made me feel like less than a man. 2 years of silence, of wondering whether the world was done with me. I remember the first day I walked into that warehouse. My first job after everything went down. It wasn't a fancy job. Hell, it wasn't even a good one. It was a minimum wage position at a rundown construction supply shop, loading bricks into trucks and unloading pallets of lumber. It was hard work, the kind of work that leaves you aching from head to toe at the end of the day. But it was work, and at that point, I didn't care what I had to do as long as it kept the bills paid. I wore the same clothes every day, a faded hoodie and jeans, the ones that were just barely hanging together from the constant wear. I had no pride left, no ambition. The pain of the last few months hung over me like a storm cloud, and I didn't know how to shake it. But there was something about that job. It was so far beneath me that it made me think about everything I had lost. It made me reflect on my old life, the warehouse, my colleagues, Linda. Everything I had worked for seemed like a joke now, but that job gave me something I hadn't realized I needed. Time. Time to think, time to rebuild, and time to get angry. Every day after work, I would go home and study. I wasn't just trying to make it through the day anymore. I started reading books on business, on law, on everything that could help me get back on my feet. Slowly but surely, I started learning the ins and outs of what it took to run a business. I had no idea what I was doing at first, but I didn't care. I was learning because it was the only thing I could do to feel like I was still in control of something. One thing became clear to me. The system that had crushed me wasn't just a fluke. It wasn't just some random accident. It was a system, a corrupt system built on lies, greed, and manipulation. And the more I learned, the more I realized that my old company, the warehouse, the people I had trusted, Greg, had been part of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. And that was when I made my decision. I would go back. It wasn't as simple as walking back through the door of my old job. They had made sure I was out of the loop, erased from the company's history as if I never existed. But I wasn't going to just walk away from this. Not after everything they had done to me. Not after the pain they had caused. I knew I had to be smart. I couldn't just barge in and start shouting accusations. I had to play it cool, gather evidence, and make sure everything was lined up before I acted. I didn't want to just get revenge. I wanted to expose Greg and the entire system he was running, destroy everything they had built. It started with small things. I kept my head down at my new job, stayed under the radar, and saved every penny I could. I began building a small network of people, lawyers, ex-corporate workers, anyone who might have information about the company. I was like a shadow, quietly slipping into the world I had once known, observing, gathering intel, waiting for the right moment to strike. I wasn't the same man who had been fired. I had changed. My sense of anger had sharpened, but so had my mind. I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter, and Greg was my prey. But the path I was walking wasn't easy. I still felt the sting of the injustice every single day. The whispers from old colleagues who had once called me a friend, but now avoided me like the plague. The cold shoulder I received from Linda, who had grown distant with each passing month. Every time I saw her, I couldn't help but feel the weight of her doubt. But the hardest part was seeing myself, the man I had become. I was no longer the man who had a good job, a happy home, a stable life. I was someone else entirely, someone consumed by rage and the need for justice. But I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't stop until I had exposed the truth. 2 years. 2 years of pain, rejection, and struggle. 2 years of learning, rebuilding, and waiting for the right moment. And then it came. I had found the evidence. The files, the emails, the shady transactions, everything. The corruption was right in front of me, and I had the proof I needed to bring it all down. I stood in front of my old workplace, staring at the building that had once been a symbol of my success. The same warehouse where I had worked for so long, where I had been accused of theft. This time I wasn't walking in as an employee. This time I was walking in as a man who had nothing left to lose. I made my way to the front desk, my heart pounding in my chest. The receptionist, who didn't recognize me, thank God, looked up at me, her face blank. "I need to speak to Greg," I said, my voice steady. I didn't flinch. She blinked, a little confused. "Greg, he's in his office, but I'll wait." I didn't have time for pleasantries. I was done with the waiting. When Greg walked into the lobby, he had that same smug look on his face, the one I had seen so many times before, but now it didn't have the same effect on me. "Michael?" He sounded surprised, almost amused. "What are you doing here?" I stood up, slowly, letting the silence hang in the air. For a moment, he looked unsure, like he was trying to process what was happening, but I was already ahead of him. "I'm here to make sure you pay for what you did," I said, my voice low and controlled. His smile faltered. "You really think you can walk back in here and destroy everything I've worked for?" he sneered. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "You don't get it, do you, Greg? You think this is about revenge. It's not. This is about the truth, and I have the proof to take you down." His face drained of color. "You think I won't destroy you?" I continued, the finality in my voice making it clear this was the end for him. "You're wrong." The tension in that room was unbearable. The weight of everything I had gone through, the pain, the sleepless nights, the endless hours of planning and studying, was now leading to this moment. Greg, the man who had framed me, who had ruined my life, was standing in front of me, trying to act as if he held all the power. But today, that illusion was about to be shattered. He took a step back, his face flickering with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" His voice was a little shaky, the confidence he usually wore like armor now slipping. He glanced toward the door, like he was considering calling security, but I could see the doubt creeping into his mind. Maybe he thought I was bluffing. But I wasn't bluffing. I slid a folder out of my bag, placing it on the desk between us. It was thick, filled with everything I had collected over the past 2 years. Emails, financial records, photographs, witness statements. Every piece of evidence that tied Greg and his little operation to a web of corruption. I had done my homework. I knew how to hit him where it hurt the most. His money, his reputation, his livelihood. Greg's eyes flickered nervously as he stared at the folder. You're crazy," he stammered, trying to regain some composure. "This is insane. You can't prove anything." I leaned in closer, my voice cold and precise. "I can, and I will. This isn't just about the theft, Greg. It's about everything. The illegal contracts, the kickbacks, the manipulation. You've been running a racket for years, and I've got it all." His face twisted in fury. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just a disgruntled employee who got fired for stealing. They'll never take your word over mine. You have nothing." I smiled, knowing how wrong he was. "You really think I'm alone in this? I've got your employees, your suppliers, people who know exactly what you've been up to. And the cops? Well, I've already made sure they know where to look. You think they won't trace all the money you've been funneling through those shady deals?" Greg was silent now, his face pale. He looked like he was trying to hold it together, but I could see the cracks beginning to form. The mask was slipping. "You've been running this place into the ground for years," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I was just the last domino to fall, but now I'm going to make sure the whole thing comes crashing down." For a long moment, Greg didn't say anything. The silence between us was thick, suffocating, and in that silence I could see it. The fear, the realization that everything he had worked for, everything he had built through lies and deceit, was on the verge of collapsing. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me, Michael?" I had waited for this moment. I had prepared for it. But hearing those words come out of his mouth felt almost unreal. He was scared. He knew what was coming. "I want your job," I said, my voice steady. "I want your reputation in ruins. I want your name to be synonymous with fraud and corruption. I want you to lose everything, just like I did." He shook his head, disbelief still written all over his face. "You think you can destroy me? You're nothing. You're a nobody." I stepped forward, my voice low, but carrying a weight of certainty. "No, Greg, I'm someone who has nothing left to lose. You took everything from me. My job, my name, my dignity. You thought you could walk away from this with no consequences. But you were wrong." He was on the edge now, his mind racing for an escape, a way out of the hole he had dug for himself. But I had made sure there was no way out. "I've already contacted your investors," I continued, my tone unflinching. "They'll find out about the embezzlement, the bribes, the way you've been bleeding this company dry. They'll be pulling their money out faster than you can say termination. Your board of directors? They won't be backing you up when the press gets a hold of this. The authorities won't let you slide this time." Greg's face twisted with a mix of rage and panic. "You can't do this. You have no idea what you're dealing with." I smiled, feeling a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. "Actually, Greg, I know exactly what I'm dealing with. You're the one who doesn't know what's coming. You're going to fall, and you're going to fall hard." He took a step toward the door, as if he was trying to retreat, but I stopped him with a single word. "Greg." He froze. "What now?" "I just want you to understand one thing," I said, my voice steady and calm. "This isn't about me. It's not about revenge. This is about you getting what you deserve. You thought you could destroy me, but you only gave me the fuel I needed to burn you down. And trust me, I will. I'm going to watch you crumble." For a moment, Greg just stood there, unable to speak, his face contorted in a mix of fear and disbelief. And then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like the last remnants of his power slipping away. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The evidence I had gathered spread quickly, like wildfire. The company's dirty secrets were exposed, one by one. News outlets picked up the story. Lawyers were involved. The police launched their investigation. And Greg, the man who had thought he was untouchable, found himself under a microscope, his every move scrutinized. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. First, the investors pulled out. Then the suppliers severed their contracts. Greg's board of directors turned on him, distancing themselves and cutting ties with the sinking ship. The company was paralyzed, unable to function without its key players. And Greg? He was nothing more than a pariah. But the real blow came when the police arrested him. They had found the trail of money, the hidden accounts, the lies, and the fraudulent contracts. Greg was facing charges that would send him to prison for years. His empire, built on theft and manipulation, was crumbling before his eyes. And I watched it all from the sidelines, feeling a cold satisfaction settle deep within me. The revenge wasn't about seeing Greg punished. It wasn't even about the satisfaction of watching him lose everything. It was about justice. It was about making sure that the man who had tried to destroy me paid the price for what he had done. And in the end, I had taken everything from him, just as he had done to me. The dust had settled. Greg's arrest made the headlines, and for a while the world spun around him. His face plastered on news reports, the cameras catching every moment of his disgrace. But as much as I reveled in the feeling of justice being served, I couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered. Revenge, after all, doesn't come with a happy ending. It doesn't bring back what was lost. 2 years ago, I had been the man with everything. A wife, a job, a future. And now I was, what? A man who had destroyed another to rebuild himself from the wreckage of his own life. The satisfaction of seeing Greg fall felt hollow because, in a strange way, it made me confront the truth. I hadn't really won. I hadn't gotten back what mattered most. The first time I saw Linda after the collapse of Greg's empire, she looked different. Not physically. She hadn't changed much in the months since we last spoke, but emotionally, she seemed to have closed herself off. When we sat down at that small coffee shop, the awkwardness was palpable. "How's your life?" she asked, her tone guarded. I wanted to tell her everything. How I had gotten my revenge, how I had burned Greg's life to the ground, and how, for the first time in 2 years, I had felt like I was in control again. But when I looked into her eyes, I knew it wouldn't matter. Nothing would change between us. I was still that man who had failed her. I was still that man who couldn't protect her from the world crashing down around us. "You know," I said quietly, looking down at my cup, "I thought bringing Greg down would make everything better. But it didn't." Linda's gaze softened, her lips tightening into a sad, knowing smile. "You've spent 2 years fighting him, fighting yourself. But you can't fix everything, Michael. Some things are just broken." Her words stung more than I expected. She was right. The fight I'd waged against Greg, the battle for justice, had consumed me. It had cost me everything. "I should have never let him get to me like that," I whispered, a bitter taste in my mouth. "I should have never let my anger take over." She reached across the table, her fingers lightly brushing mine. "We all make mistakes. You did what you thought was right, but it doesn't mean you have to carry all that guilt." I nodded, but the weight of it still pressed down on me. The guilt, the loss. It was a part of me now, something I couldn't escape. But as I left the coffee shop, I realized something. She was right. I didn't need to carry the guilt anymore. I had made my choice. I had fought for something, and I had won. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a clean slate, but it was justice. And that was enough. Greg had lost everything. His wealth, his reputation, his freedom, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to repair the damage. And I had moved on. I was no longer the man who had been dragged through the dirt. I was the man who had emerged from the wreckage, scarred but stronger. The world might have tried to break me, but I was still standing. In the days that followed, things started to change, slowly, quietly. I went back to my old job, the warehouse where it all began. It wasn't the same, nothing ever would be, but there was something different in the air. The tension had eased. People who had once avoided me now nodded in acknowledgement, and even some of the higher-ups treated me with a newfound respect. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about some kind of reconciliation. It was about survival, about moving on, about living in the aftermath and finding a way to keep going. I started small, took on more responsibilities, learned from the mistakes I had made, from the way I had let the anger eat at me until it consumed everything I was. I learned to focus on the future, to build something solid again. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I was the one who had the power now. Not Greg, not anyone else. A few months later, I got a call. It was Linda. "Michael, I need to tell you something." Her voice was trembling. My heart sank. "What's wrong?" "There's something I should have told you a long time ago. When all this started, I—" She paused, a long breath escaping her. "I didn't just leave you because of Greg. It wasn't just the affair, or the things he did to you." I stayed silent, waiting, feeling the weight of her words press against my chest. "I was pregnant, Michael," she whispered. "When you got fired, I was already pregnant. I was going to tell you. I wanted to, but things got too complicated. I was scared." For a moment, everything stopped. Time stretched, the air in my lungs frozen. The silence was deafening. "A child?" I finally managed to say. "A son?" "Yes," she said softly. "A son. I kept him. I didn't know if you would want to be part of his life, after everything that happened." I didn't know what to say. A son? My son? After everything that had happened, after all the pain and loss, suddenly there was a chance at something new, a chance to fix what had broken inside me. "Can I meet him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Linda's voice cracked. "He's waiting for you." It was in that moment that I realized revenge had never been the final answer. It wasn't the destruction of Greg that had given me peace. It was the discovery of what truly mattered. And that was a chance at redemption, at making things right in a way I hadn't expected. I didn't need Greg's downfall to heal. I needed something to build on, something that could take me beyond the man I had been. And now I had the chance to be a father, to be the man I always should have been.